And I want to talk about
Oh, no.
the sex cult. All right, so this is a story that happened a long time ago, about 2 years ago. The NXIVM sex cult is now getting closer to a conclusion. The background on this story, so this woman, her name is Brofman. Her name is Clare Brofman, and she was somebody who was involved in the NXIVM. It's called the NXIVM. It's pronounced NXIVM sex cult, and she's going to be sentenced for her crimes literally on this Wednesday. So this case has been going on for about 2 years, and she pled guilty back in April of 2019. So a long time ago, a year and a half ago. She's just about to get sentenced. So her case has been going on for about 18 months. She's going to finally be sentenced, which means she's going to go to prison or not. And so I want to talk a little bit about this story because it is curious. It is interesting now that we're coming to a conclusion. The big question is going to be, what is she going to be sentenced to? Okay, this was a woman who was a part of the NXIVM sex cult. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Part of another group called the DOS, which really was a disturbing group, and then all sorts of, actually bringing people, trafficking human beings into the United States in order to make them sex slaves. And what is she going to get? Is she going to go to prison for a long period of time? We have a copy of her sentencing letter, which she submitted to the court, and I want to go through that a little bit. But let's talk about this actual case. So, as I said, in 2019, she actually pled guilty to 2 charges: identity theft and an immigration violation. So think about those 2 things, right? Identity theft and immigration violations. That's kind of weird, right? She was involved in a sex cult. She was trafficking people across borders. There was a pyramid scheme going on. There was all this sort of extortion taking place and, presumably, moving money around and all sorts of stuff. But she pled guilty to 2 crimes: immigration violation and identity theft. Those sound pretty minor to me. Wonder what's going on there. So prosecutors accused her of using false statements. She secured visas for young women from Mexico. They were recruited in, and then they started to work for NXIVM. She conspired with the leader of NXIVM. His name is R&R, and they basically worked together to commit identity theft by using the credit card and the bank account of R&R's dead girlfriend, which kept assets out of his name and then allowed him to evade income tax requirements. So there's a lot going on here. Those are all crimes. At the time, many of the victims were frustrated by the guilty plea that happened back in 2019. Because they're saying that it minimized her role, and her lawyers have said they were responding essentially with the affluent defense. Do you remember this case from years ago? I forget the name of it, but there was a kid who did something terrible. I think he murdered somebody or killed some people in a car accident, and he got a slap on the wrist essentially because of the affluent defense. He's too rich. He has too much money. He doesn't know any better. Therefore, he can't be responsible to the same level that you or I could be responsible for. Okay, so the very, very rich, the ultra wealthy, they sort of live in a different justice system than you or I do. If you're worth $1 billion, you can have a lot of success when you're facing criminal charges for things like bringing people across Mexico, trafficking them into the United States, and then making them sex slaves. If you do that and you have a few $1 billion in a legal defense, what does that mean for you? Well, you get an immigration violation. You get an identity theft violation, whereas somebody else doing those things would certainly not get the benefit of that plea. So the victim said that she was, played a much bigger part in this thing, but for some reason, the prosecutors are offering her a pretty low-level deal. They're saying she is going to be sentenced on Wednesday, and it feels very light to me. The prosecutors are asking for 5 years in prison. Her defense team, they're asking for 0, obviously, right? The defense always asks for nothing. And that's pretty light. She could be going to prison just based on those 2 charges for up to 25 years. So the judge has the range, the opportunity to give her basically 0 time or all the way up to 25 years. And during the change of plea proceeding, he warned her to that fact. He said specifically, I don't have to follow the sentencing recommendations. I can give you 10 years on the one charge and 15 years on the other charge, and I can run those things consecutively, so I can stack them on top of one another. So you'll do the 10 first, then you'll do the 15 next. He could go that route. We don't know if he will or not, but the government is asking for 5 years. So a maximum of 25, they're asking for 5. Her defense is going to be not asking for any time. And we see that she's scheduled for Wednesday. And if you don't know who she is the heiress to the Seagram's liquor fortune. So Seagram's vodka and all that sort of low-end alcohol. Her family basically created that. Her father was a billionaire. And so she spent tons and tons of money supporting this NXIVM group. So let me show you this. So this is really sort of what the foundation was. The NXIVM group said that they were sort of an educational organization for adults and other entrepreneurs and people who wanted to make more of their lives. And they started this group called the Executive Success Programs, ESP. So this is one of the NXIVM buildings. It was based near Albany, New York. It was marketed as a workshop that would help people overcome their fears and then, sort of self-actualize. They were looking for trust fund babies. They were looking for people with low self-esteem, and then they would charge people to come and take their courses. So it kind of reminds me of some of the Scientology stuff, but they would say that these courses are $5,000. It looks like from 1998, over 18,000 people have taken the courses, which are worth thousands of dollars a piece. And so the NXIVM group was sort of the face. It was the higher level, public facing, this is our legitimate business. We're only here to help people improve their lives. But unfortunately, that wasn't the truth, because there's a lot of other problems going on. And this is the other kind of shadow organization called the DOS. So you had the NXIVM at the top, which would bring a bunch of people in, and it would sort of charge them a bunch of money for these online courses or these educational courses. And if they couldn't afford it, then they would just get into debt with NXIVM. And then as a result of that debt, they would have to sort of be indebted to the organization. So they couldn't leave, and they had to stay, and they had to work, and they would take more courses and then accumulate an even bigger debt. So that's how they would capture these people, and they would stay there for a long period of time. Rainier was the head of this. So we have the woman we're talking about now, Miss Brofman. She was sort of the funding arm. She donated tens of millions of dollars over to the NXIVM organization. And then she was really working closely with this guy named Rainier. Now, Rainier turned this second organization called the DOS, stands for Dominus Obsequious Sororium. He turned it into this literally a sex cult where he would brand women and he would make them lose weight, and he would ask them to film themselves saying they did terrible things, and then he would use that as leverage. He would use that as blackmail over them to make sure that they kept coming back and they did what he wanted, and they had to respond to his text messages all the time and all sorts of stuff. And so he even branded them and with his initials. And this was all done, allegedly, according to Miss Brofman and to Keith, with open arms. People wanted to do this. This was done voluntarily. This is what one of the actual brands looks like. So Keith, we see a K there. And then we see the A. So Keith, A, and then we see the R. The R is for his last name. So we see Keith A. Rainier. And this is one of the government's exhibits in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So he's literally taking women and branding them. And the name Obsequious Dominus, or Dominus Obsequious Sororium, stands for the translation. I'm not a Latin scholar, but I looked this up on the internet, and somebody is telling me that it is master over slave women. Dominus Obsequious Sororium, master over slave women. And so that was founded in 2015. He turned them into sex slaves, gave them restricted diets. They had to make a lifetime vow. They had to call him their masters, and then they would do these illegal human experiments. I don't even know what that is, but it's not good. And there's stories saying that the slaves would then have to go out and find other slaves and then bring them back in, and then they would be their masters in this like hierarchy, this pyramid of this slaves, going down and going down. So not good. This guy, this is him. This is Keith Rainier. And he was the only defendant in this case that actually went to trial. So all of the other people, you may have heard, remember this lady? This was Allison Mack. I think she was the actress in Smallville. And, she took a plea deal. Brofman took a plea deal, but this guy did not. He was convicted in June 2019. Now, he got the more serious charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, other crimes. He said that he was sort of the literature in the NXIVM and the DOS sex cults were that he was the smartest man in the world. Not too smart, though. Mr. Rainier, he created a secret group of women, leading to NXIVM's reputation as a sex cult. He was called the Master and the Grand Master. They were undergo near starvation diets and respond to his unexpected text messages at all hours. Women who failed their duties were whipped with a leather strap. So the women were required to hand over what they call collateral that could act as blackmail, photographs, videos. They would falsely accuse their spouses in these videos of abuse so that they could, so basically, they could go back to their spouse, or R&R or NXIVM or DOS could take that to the police and say, hey, they were getting abused, or they actually, were involved in some sort of domestic violence with their spouse. So legal claims, all sorts of stuff. Claire, the other woman who's getting sentenced on Wednesday, she joined in 2003. She had heard about it from her sister. And just like that affluenza defense, that I have too much money defense, she is going to be claiming that as well. We have a copy of her sentencing recommendation. I want to show you a little bit more about how that's going to work. She says, I was always shy. I never knew how to communicate with anybody. I had a lot of insecurity about my wealth, and so I had too much money. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know what to do with it. So then she poured more than $100 million, and she gave into NXIVM, funneling their legal battles, really providing for private investigators and funding marketing and all this stuff. $100 million, $67 million, which she gave over to this Keith R&R guy who never repaid it. $67 million, he invested that in commodities markets. And so people are very upset because Brofman is now, depending on what happens on Wednesday, if she gets 5 years, if she gets less than 5 years, people are a little concerned about that because they're saying that all of this misconduct, all of this horror show, this freak show of, branding people and trafficking people across state borders and all of that horrendous stuff, they're saying that this was all enabled by Brofman. She was the one who funded this organization. So why is she getting off with a recommendation from the U.S. government for 5 years? I don't know. Good question. Good question. They said that she even targeted her own father when she was a part of this cult. She installed malware on her father's computer, giving her access to all of his email accounts for years. Her father is a billionaire. Her lawyers have argued that she should not go to prison at all because she genuinely believed that NXIVM was a force for good. She had no idea about the human trafficking or sexual abuse. But she pled guilty to some of those things anyways. Not necessarily trafficking for sex trafficking, but just an immigration violation. I don't know what the nature of that charge is, but we'll certainly know more after sentencing. She's accused of making false statements to secure visas for young women from Mexico, who she specifically recruited. She conspired to commit credit card fraud by using the bank account of R&R's dead girlfriend. She kept assets out of names to allow him to evade tax requirements. So 5 years for all of that, to me, is very, very low. Wonder if you or I would get that same benefit. This case, as we know, became a spectacle. It actually even became an HBO series, which I have not seen yet, but I've heard is pretty good. We saw Allison Mack was also involved in this thing. She was one of the more high-profile people, but a lot of people were involved in this whole ordeal.